My name is Vera Cole and I am 60 years old. My husband told me to stay in the kitchen while he discussed business. I walked in and introduced myself as the CEO he was trying to meet. The smell of roasted lamb filled the room, but the air felt like ice. I stood there, 60 years old with flour still on my apron, holding a heavy serving platter. My husband, Marcus, didn't even look at me. He was leaning back in his chair, swirling an expensive glass of wine while two younger men in sharp suits watched him. They were the big investors we had been waiting for. I leaned in to set the platter down, my heart thumping against my ribs. I wanted to mention the new software patent I had spent 3 years perfecting. But before I could open my mouth, Marcus put a hand on my arm and pushed me back slightly. He gave a mean, small smirk that made my skin crawl. "Stay in the kitchen, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with fake kindness. "The men are discussing big business now. We don't want to bore you with numbers." The room went dead silent. Marcus laughed, expecting the investors to join in, but they didn't. They looked at me, then at each other, their faces turning into masks of pure shock. One of them, a tall man named Mr. Sterling, slowly stood up. He didn't look at Marcus, he looked right at my tired eyes and my messy apron. "Stay in the kitchen?" Mr. Sterling whispered, his voice sounding like thunder. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" I felt a cold fire start to burn in my chest. I wiped my hands on my apron and took a step forward, right into the light of the chandelier. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like the woman who built the world they were standing in. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and sharp as a razor. "I think there has been a mistake. I am Vera Cole, the CEO you actually came to meet." I watched the blood drain from Marcus's face until he looked like a ghost. His hand trembled, and he nearly knocked over his wine. "Vera, stop playing," he hissed, but his voice was weak. Mr. Sterling ignored him completely. "You are the Vera Cole of Novatech?" he asked, his eyes wide with respect. "The one who designed the neural link coding?" I nodded slowly, feeling the power shift in the room like a heavy tide. "That is me," I replied. "And it seems my husband forgot to tell you that we share everything in this house, except for the brains behind the business." Marcus tried to stand up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He looked like a cornered animal, desperate and small. The investors didn't even glance his way. They were too busy staring at the woman they had mistaken for a simple cook. It was the most beautiful silence I had ever heard. After the investors walked out the door without saying another word, the house felt too big and too quiet. Marcus didn't wait a second. He exploded, his face turning a deep, angry red. "You humiliated me," he screamed, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table. "Those men were my only chance to make something of myself, and you turned me into a joke in my own dining room." I stood my ground, my arms crossed over my chest. I wasn't the quiet wife he had spent 20 years shrinking. "No, Marcus," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You exposed yourself. You showed them exactly how little you value the person who keeps your world spinning." He looked like he wanted to say more, but his phone suddenly buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mr. Sterling. The message was short: "We are withdrawing the proposal immediately. We don't do business with liars." The silence that followed was even heavier than the scream. Marcus stared at his phone, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of real fear in his eyes. He wasn't just losing a deal, he was losing his grip on me. I realized then that he had been counting on this money more than he let on. "How much did you promise them, Marcus?" I asked. He wouldn't look at me. He just slumped into his chair, looking every bit his age. "I mortgaged the house, Vera," he whispered. "I used the equity to fund the initial research. I thought if I got this deal, I could pay it back before you ever found out." My breath caught in my throat. He had used our home, the place where we raised our children, to chase my connections behind my back. If this story of betrayal is hitting home, hit subscribe for more revenge stories right now. "You risked everything," I whispered, "just to feel powerful." I sat in my dark office later that night, the glow of the computer screen the only light. I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning like a broken gear. I started digging through the digital files Marcus thought I never looked at. He always told me technology was too complicated for a woman of my generation, which was the funniest lie he ever told. As I scrolled through his sent emails, my heart stopped. He hadn't just mortgaged the house. He had been exporting my private company data, my life's work, to a rival firm called Apex Industries. He was selling my secrets to the very people who tried to sue me 3 years ago. I clicked on a folder labeled private, and my blood turned to ice. There were confidential blueprints sent under my own digital signature. He was framing me for corporate espionage while stealing our future. I didn't wait for morning. I marched into the bedroom and flipped on the lights. Marcus groaned, shielding his eyes. "What now, Vera?" he grumbled. I threw his laptop onto the bed. "I found the Apex files, Marcus. I found the signatures." He sat up fast, his eyes darting around the room. He didn't try to deny it this time. Instead, he turned mean. He stood up and loomed over me, trying to use his height to scare me like he used to. "I built you," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Without my social standing and my name, you'd be nothing but a lonely old woman in a lab. I took what was mine." I felt something inside me snap. I picked up the glass of water from the nightstand and dropped it. It shattered into 1,000 pieces between us. "We'll see who's nothing by the time I'm finished with you," I said. The next morning, I didn't waste time crying. I called Naomi. She had been my attorney for 20 years and my best friend for longer. We met at a small, hidden park where the wind whistled through the oak trees. When I showed her the screenshots of the data transfers, her jaw tightened. Naomi was a legal shark who lived for moments like this. "He's trying to sink your entire legacy to stay afloat," she whispered, her eyes scanning the documents. She told me that if we moved too fast, he might delete the evidence or hide the offshore trails. We needed to be smart. We had to let him think he was still in control while we built a cage around him. "He's hanging himself already, Vera," Naomi said, patting my hand with a cold, knowing smile. "Let's just tighten the rope and wait for the drop." I needed more than just legal advice. I needed a ghost in the machine. I hired a young IT expert named Leo. He was a wizard with a keyboard and didn't ask too many questions. I tucked him away in a small hotel room with a high-speed connection. Within hours, he had traced the path of the stolen data. It led straight to the CEO of Apex Industries, a man who had hated me for decades. But there was more. Leo pulled up a series of private messages between Marcus and a woman. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. It was his ex-lover from before we married. They had been meeting in secret for months, planning how to split the money once my company was gutted. I stared at their photos on the screen. "So this is personal," I whispered. The betrayal went deeper than money. Coming home that evening was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to put on a mask. Marcus was waiting in the kitchen with a bouquet of yellow roses and a bottle of expensive wine. He looked at me with those soft, lying eyes that I used to find so comforting. "Vera, I was stressed," he said, stepping closer to try and hug me. "I said horrible things, but I want to make it right. I love you." I let him hold me, even though my skin felt like it was crawling with spiders. I forced myself to smile and lean into his chest. I needed him to believe I was the same forgiving, soft woman I had always been. If he felt safe, he would become sloppy. "He wants war," I whispered into his shoulder where he couldn't see my face, "so I'll give him theater." A few days later, Marcus suggested a plan. He was desperate to get back into the investors' good graces. "Let's host another dinner," he said, his voice full of fake excitement. "A smaller one. Just us, the investors, and a few close friends. We can show them we are a united front. It will rebuild the trust we lost." I looked at him and saw the predator trying to lure me back into his trap. He probably wanted to use the night to sign more papers he'd hidden in the shadows. I nodded and agreed, acting like a dutiful wife who wanted to save her marriage. But as soon as he left the room, I called Naomi. We weren't going to invite investors. We were going to invite the people who would end his career. Naomi laughed on the phone. "This is going to be fun," she said. The night of the second dinner arrived. Marcus was in high spirits, wearing his best tuxedo and acting like the king of the castle. He walked around the living room, bragging to the guests about his leadership and how his deals were going to change the industry. He talked about me like I was a talented assistant who just needed his guidance to succeed. I stayed in the background, sipping water and playing the role of the quiet, supportive spouse. But hidden in the floral arrangements and under the sideboard were high-quality microphones. Everything he said, every lie about his ownership of the patents and every fake financial promise, was being recorded directly to Naomi's laptop in the other room. If you are rooting for the truth to come out, subscribe for more justice stories now. Naomi whispered through my earpiece, "That's fraud, on tape." The dessert plates were cleared, and Marcus stood up to give a final, arrogant toast. He raised his glass, looking around the room with a smug grin. To the future, he said, and to the man who makes it happen. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, the silk of my dress rustling in the sudden silence. Actually, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through his ego like a knife, I think we should toast to the truth. I pulled a small remote from my pocket and pressed a button. A hidden projector turned on, displaying his private emails to Apex Industries on the dining room wall for everyone to see. The guests gasped. Marcus went pale, his glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. You just admitted to falsifying documents in front of 12 witnesses, I told him. I left him there, stammering and broken, as cameras flashed. The morning after the dinner, the world felt like it was spinning in a different direction. Marcus's reputation didn't just slip, it tanked overnight. By breakfast, the local business journals were already posting the leaked images from my projector. The golden boy of the tech scene was being called a fraud and a thief. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from clients who were withdrawing their accounts from any project Marcus had touched. I sat in my garden, watching the sun hit the rose bushes, feeling a strange sense of peace. The media was ruthless, questioning every move he had ever made. He stormed into my office around noon, his hair messy and his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. You're destroying me, he screamed, spit flying from his lips. He looked like a man who had lost his soul. I didn't even look up from my tablet. I just kept scrolling through the morning reports. No, Marcus, I replied, my voice as steady as the oak trees outside. I'm simply holding up a mirror. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that my hard work was yours to sell. He stood there, shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He had spent years thinking I was too soft to fight back, and now he was drowning in the reality of my strength. He leaned over my desk, his shadow falling over me like a dark cloud. You think you've won? He whispered, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what I'm capable of when I have nothing left to lose. You'll regret this, Vera. I promise you. He turned and slammed the door so hard the glass rattled in the frames. 2 days later, the first blow of his counterattack landed. Marcus had gone to the tabloids with a pack of disgusting lies. He leaked rumors that I hadn't designed my own software, but had instead slept my way to the top of the industry. He claimed he was the real, silent genius and that I was just a face for the brand. The headlines were brutal. Novatech Queen, a fraud in the boardroom, read one particularly nasty article. I watched as the public began to feast on the scandal. My board of directors, mostly men who were already looking for a reason to doubt a woman of my age, panicked. They called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. They wanted to discuss my fitness to lead the company I had built from nothing. The pressure was mounting, and the air felt thin. The boardroom was freezing. 12 men sat around the long table, their faces grim and judgmental. I walked in wearing a power suit the color of midnight, my head held high. They started throwing questions at me before I even sat down. They asked about the rumors, the missing research logs, and the accusations Marcus had made. One board member, a man who had always been a thorn in my side, sighed loudly. Vera, the optics are terrible. We might need you to step down for the sake of the shares. I didn't flinch. I let them talk until the room went quiet, expecting me to beg for my job. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the cool table. Gentlemen, I said, my voice echoing with a power that stopped their breathing. I don't need to defend my character. I have proof. I opened my laptop and connected it to the main screen. I didn't show them my work, I showed them the security footage Leo had recovered from Marcus's private study. The video was crystal clear. It showed Marcus meeting with the CEO of Apex Industries in the middle of the night. It showed them exchanging a physical hard drive and Marcus signing a contract to sabotage Novatech from the inside. The board members watched in absolute silence. They saw Marcus laughing as he spoke about bleeding the old woman dry. The man who had suggested I step down slowly sank back into his chair, his face turning a shade of gray. When the video ended, the silence was broken by a single person clapping. Then another. They realized they had almost sided with a traitor. The turn was complete. The board's reaction was swift and merciless. Within an hour, they moved to strip Marcus of every association with the firm. The news hit the wires like a lightning strike. Marcus didn't just lose his pride, he lost his position at the rival firm, too. Apex Industries issued a cold statement saying they had been misled by Mr. Cole and were cutting all ties. His bank accounts were frozen as the authorities opened an investigation into corporate espionage and theft. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the world move on without him. My lawyer, Naomi, tapped on my window and gave me a sharp, predatory smile. She looked like she had just won a marathon. The accounts are locked, and the evidence is filed, she said, leaning against the door. Round 1 is officially complete, Vera. He's officially a man without a country. That night, I heard a heavy pounding on my front door. It was raining, a cold October drizzle that made everything look gray. I opened the door to find Marcus standing there, soaked to the bone and smelling of cheap whiskey. He looked older than I had ever seen him, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. He didn't look like a CEO, he looked like a broken man. Vera, please, he sobbed, his voice cracking. I lost everything. The banks, the house, the reputation, it's all gone. You in, okay? Just tell the police it was a misunderstanding. He reached out a trembling hand, trying to touch my face. I stepped back, my expression as hard as granite. I looked at the man I had loved for decades and felt nothing but a distant, cold pity. Oh no, Marcus, I whispered. We're just getting started. The next morning, Naomi arrived at my office with a thick yellow folder. Her eyes were bright with the thrill of the hunt. She had spent the night digging into the frozen records and found exactly what she was looking for. We found it, Vera, she said, sliding a bank statement across the desk. He wasn't just stealing data. He moved $500,000 of company funds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under a shell company. I looked at the numbers, the cold proof of his greed. He had been planning his escape for a long time, building a golden parachute while he watched me work. He thought he was so much smarter than everyone else, but greed always leaves a trail of crumbs. I picked up the phone to call the district attorney. Are you ready for your summons, Marcus? I asked the empty room. I decided it was time to cut the final tie. I didn't tell Marcus I was leaving, I let the law do the talking. I filed for divorce quietly, using the evidence of his fraud as the grounds for an immediate separation. Marcus was so busy dealing with his legal depositions and the freezing of his assets that he didn't even see the papers coming. He was sitting in a cold room with a court reporter when a process server walked in and handed him the envelope. I watched through the one-way glass as he opened it. His jaw dropped, and he gasped for air as if he had been punched in the gut. You served me, he whispered, looking toward the glass as if he knew I was there. He looked like a man who had finally realized the bridge was burnt. The courtroom was the site of the final showdown. Marcus tried to play the victim, standing before the judge with his shoulders slumped. His lawyer argued that I was a vindictive woman who was trying to ruin a man's life over a simple marital dispute. But when it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I produced a mountain of receipts, digital logs, and witness statements from the very investors he had tried to trick. I showed the judge the offshore account and the recorded conversations from the dinner. The judge frowned, looking through the documents with a sharp, discerning eye. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Mr. Cole, the judge said, his voice echoing through the chamber, this doesn't look like a dispute. This looks like a deliberate, criminal plan to defraud your wife. The news of the courtroom drama spread like a wildfire through a dry forest. Every major business outlet carried the headline, former CEO's husband accused of corporate espionage. The details were juicy and dark, exposing every lie Marcus had ever told me. On social media, the public didn't just support me, they cheered. A video of me walking out of the courthouse with my head held high went viral. But the biggest blow to Marcus didn't come from me. His ex-lover, the woman he had planned a future with using my money, realized the ship was sinking. To save herself from jail time, she turned on him. She handed over every text message and every recording they had shared. She traded his heart for her immunity. Marcus was left standing in the wreckage of his own making, completely and utterly alone. With the legal battles finally turning in my favor, I decided it was time to move from defense to offense. I launched a massive rebrand campaign for my company. I called it Nova Rising. It wasn't just about software anymore. It was about resilience. At the launch event, I stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people and thousands watching online. I didn't talk about numbers or patents. I talked about the fire. For every woman who has been told to stay in the kitchen, I said, my voice echoing with a strength that shook the room. I say this, build your own table and invite the world to it. The speech went viral within minutes, gaining millions of views overnight. My revenge was no longer a secret. It was a movement. The justice was beginning, and it felt like sunshine after a long, cold winter. A few days later, a famous journalist sat across from me for a televised interview. She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. Vera, many people are calling your actions a masterclass in revenge. Was it all intentional? I looked directly into the camera lens, thinking of Marcus sitting in his small, rented apartment, watching my success. I gave a small, knowing smile. It wasn't revenge, I said softly. It was educational. I simply taught a man that a woman's silence is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of preparation. The clip was shared by world leaders and tech giants alike. Marcus watched from a dark bar, clutching a drink he couldn't afford, watching the woman he tried to destroy become an icon. He was shattered, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Marcus, desperate to prove he wasn't a failure, tried to start a new consulting firm. He used what little money he had left to lease a small office and build a website. He reached out to every old contact he had, begging for a chance. But the world had moved on. Every time he mentioned a deal, investors fled the moment they heard his name. They didn't want to be associated with a man who had betrayed the queen of tech. Before he could even launch his first advertisement, he found that his website domain was gone. I had bought it the moment he registered the name. I didn't use it for anything. I just let it sit there, a blank white page, a digital reminder that I owned the ground he was trying to stand on. By the end of the year, Novatech hadn't just recovered, it had exploded. Our stock prices hit an all-time high, and I was named Entrepreneur of the Year by 3 different magazines. At the awards gala, I stood on the podium, looking out at a sea of faces that finally saw me for who I was. I held the heavy crystal trophy in my hands, feeling the weight of my journey. My acceptance speech was short and sharp. Dedication outlasts deception every single time, I told the crowd. I looked at the cameras, knowing Marcus was likely watching from somewhere in the shadows. I had turned his insults into my armor, and his betrayal into my fuel. I wasn't just the CEO anymore, I was a legend in the making. The glory of the awards was still fresh when my phone rang. It was Marcus's lawyer. His voice sounded different, no longer arrogant or cold, but exhausted. He told me that Marcus wanted mediation. He was tired of the court dates, the freezing rain of public hatred, and the mounting debt. He wanted to sit across a table from me and find a way to end the war. I looked at the city lights from my penthouse office, feeling the cool glass against my forehead. I could have said no. I could have let the legal system finish him off. But I realized I wanted to see his face one last time. I wanted to see the men who told me to stay in the kitchen look me in the eye now that I own the world. I'll agree, I said, for closure. The meeting room was small and smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Marcus was already sitting there when I walked in. He looked thinner, his skin sallow and his eyes sunken into his head. The expensive tuxedo was gone, replaced by a cheap, off-the-rack suit that hung loosely on his frame. He didn't look like a predator anymore. He looked like a ghost.
Vera, he whispered as I sat down.
He didn't try to argue or yell. Can we just start over? I'll give up the claims. I'll go away. Just stop the lawsuits. I leaned forward, my hands folded neatly on the table. I didn't feel anger, just a strange, quiet victory. No, Marcus, I said, my voice as firm as a heartbeat. You taught me to finish strong. I'm just following your lesson. I walked out smiling. Shortly after the mediation failed, I received an unexpected phone call. A massive international rival, a company based in London, offered me a merger. It was the kind of deal that happens once in a lifetime. They didn't want to buy me out, they wanted to join forces. I sat with their board for 3 days, negotiating every detail with the precision of a master architect. I accepted the deal, but only under one condition: I would chair both boards. I wanted total control of the new empire. When the papers were signed, I stood at the window of a skyscraper, realizing I was now one of the most powerful women in the global industry. Marcus was a tiny speck in my rearview mirror, a small man who had tried to cage a giant. That evening, Naomi and I sat on my balcony, sharing a bottle of vintage champagne. The bubbles danced in the glass, reflecting the golden sunset. Naomi raised her glass to me, her eyes sparkling with pride. To Novatech and beyond, she toasted. Funny how freedom tastes like power, isn't it? I took a sip, the cold liquid sharp and sweet on my tongue. I looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the sea. I thought about the years I spent shrinking myself to make Marcus feel big. I thought about the kitchen and the flour on my apron. Or maybe, I replied softly, power tastes like freedom. We sat in the silence of the city, 2 women who had navigated the storm and found the shore. It was the most satisfying drink of my life. The world was still buzzing about my success when a major streaming network reached out. They wanted to turn my life story into a documentary series. They called it The Architect of Justice. They wanted to show the world how I built my company, how I was betrayed, and how I took it all back. I hesitated at first, wondering if I wanted to relive the pain. But then I thought of all the women who were still sitting in their own kitchens, afraid to speak up. I said yes, but I gave them one strict rule. Tell it truthfully, I told the producers. Don't make me a victim. Make me the person who held the pen. They agreed, and the cameras began to roll, capturing the reality of my journey from the shadows to the light. The documentary filming was intense. I sat in a high-back velvet chair, the studio lights bright and warm against my skin. The director asked me a question that made me pause. In the end, Vera, was it all about the revenge? I looked into the lens, seeing my own reflection in the glass. I thought about the long nights of gaslighting and the way Marcus had tried to steal my very identity. I didn't want revenge, I admitted, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a confession. I wanted respect. Revenge is a fire that burns out, but respect is the ground you stand on. The clip was released as a teaser for the show, and it went viral for its raw honesty. Thousands of people messaged me, sharing their own stories of being silenced. My truth was becoming a bridge for others. Marcus couldn't handle the spotlight. As the documentary gained popularity, he tried to sue me for defamation, claiming the series was a fictionalized attack on his character. He thought he could use the legal system to bully me one last time. But he was playing checkers while I was playing chess. My lawyers didn't just defend the case. They launched a massive counterclaim for $10 million in damages related to his original theft and the emotional distress he had caused. We had every receipt, every text, and every witness ready to go. His lawsuit crumbled within weeks, leaving him with even more legal fees he couldn't pay. The hunters had officially become the hunted, and the weight of his own lies was finally crushing him into the dirt. The day of the final verdict arrived. I stood outside the courthouse, the wind whipping my hair as a crowd of reporters gathered around me. The judge had ruled completely in my favor, awarding me the full damages and ordering Marcus to pay every cent he had left. He was officially bankrupt, disgraced, and barred from ever holding an executive position again. As I stood there, the reporters began to cheer my name. It wasn't just about a court case anymore. It was a celebration of a woman who refused to stay in the shadows. I looked at the cameras and didn't say a word. I just gave a small, dignified nod. The justice was final, and the world knew exactly who Vera Cole was. I walked to my car, leaving the noise behind. A few weeks later, Naomi came over to my house. We were sitting in the garden, the air smelling of fresh jasmine. She looked at me and laughed, nudging my shoulder. Vera, you've conquered the world, she said. Now you need a new man, one who isn't terrified of your brain. I rolled my eyes, thinking I was done with romance forever. But then I met Luca. He was the producer of the streaming documentary, a man with graying hair and kind, confident eyes. He didn't look at me like a trophy or a threat. He looked at me like a partner. After a long day of editing, he turned to me with a respectful smile.
Dinner, Ms. Cole? He asked.
And don't worry, I know you're the boss. For the first time in years, I said yes. My relationship with Luca built slowly, like a well-crafted piece of furniture. It was respectful, electric, and completely real. We spent evenings talking about philosophy, technology, and the future. He didn't try to interrupt me or explain my own business to me. One night, while we were walking along the pier, he stopped and looked at me with an expression of pure admiration. The moon was reflected in the water, and the world felt quiet and safe. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. You know, Vera, he whispered, his voice warm and steady. You never belonged in a kitchen. You belong on a throne, and I'm just honored to stand beside it. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, finally began to thaw. Months passed, and the final piece of the puzzle arrived in my inbox. It was a message from Marcus, sent from an anonymous account in a country I didn't recognize. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me, the message read. I see you everywhere, and I realize now that I was the one who was small. I stared at the words on the screen, remembering the man who had pushed me back from the dinner table. I didn't feel joy or even anger anymore. I just felt finished. I typed a short, two-word reply. Correction, you revealed it. I didn't wait for a response. I hit delete, clearing the notification and the memory from my life forever. He was a ghost, and I was finally living in the light of the present. The final scene of my documentary was filmed at a massive tech summit. I stood on a stage before thousands of young women, their faces glowing with hope and ambition. I looked out at them and remembered the girl I used to be, the one who thought she had to be quiet to be loved. They told me to stay in the kitchen, I said, my voice echoing through the massive hall. So I built an empire instead. Never let someone else define your space. The applause was so loud it felt like it could shake the stars. As I walked off the stage, the camera panned up to the city skyline, showing the Novatech logo shining bright against the dark blue sky. I was Vera Cole, and I was finally home. Respect isn't given. It's built, one insult at a time.
Thank you.
Please like, share and subscribe for more. Also turn on your notification bell so you be the first to get our next shocking revenge story.